They laughed, because the record told them to. Grand Registrar Thale watched the human system resolve into full tactical clarity, a yellow sphere with a scatter of cold, insignificant points. 67 hulls, crude silhouettes, no energy veils, worth naming. The bridge murmured with practiced disdain as the catalogue populated itself, ancestry tags unfurling like a verdict already written. Kinetic species, Thale said, letting the word carry its weight. Late industrial, atmospheric, fighters, projectile bias. The Admiralty ring chimed approval. A dozen species, a dozen anatomies, unified by precedent. 10,000 council vessels held station at 0.8 AU, a lattice of clean geometry and older victories. This was not a battle formation, it was a filing arrangement. The human transmission arrived late and narrowband, as if embarrassed by its own reach, a demand for ceasefire corridors, evacuation windows measured in hours, a request to speak of terms. Laughter rippled again, sharper this time. Processing category? Someone asked. Thale flicked the console and the answer rose obediently. Non-compliant, militarized, sentient labor indicators present on 3 orbital habitats. The law was clear, the schedule clearer. Standard, Thale said. Phase 1 suppression, Phase 2 pacification, Phase 3 redistribution. The clock populated itself. 6 hours to silence. 20 million relocations estimated. Casualty. Tolerance set to council minimums. The numbers glowed calm and perfect. Primitive, the annotations said. Relics of force. A junior tactician highlighted the human hulls, magnifying rough plating and redundant mass. They armor against fragments, she said, puzzled. Against debris. Fear culture, Thaler replied. They expect accidents. Second transmission followed, stronger, stripped of ornament. The humans repeated their request. Corridors, surrender protections, a declaration that prisoners would not be killed. The bridge laughed again, but thinner. Mark refusal. Thyle said, "Proceed." Orders flowed like gravity, energy banks charged to 100%, firing solutions aligned across 10,000 hulls. The map showed the humans as pale dots against a disciplined wall of light. This will be brief. The thought was not arrogance. It was arithmetic. Every council officer present had seen this shape before. Resistance always collapsed under scale. Moral objections always followed, late and irrelevant. Thale leaned back, satisfied as the final authorization rune pulsed, processing approved. A final note auto-attached to the record, a historian's flourish written before the ink had dried. Another minor species corrected. Another silence added to the long, orderly archive. No one on the bridge noticed the human ship's changing orientation. No one thought to ask why they were laughing. The first salvo authorization completed, and Thale nodded once, already bored, as the countdown reached 0. They spoke as if this were negotiable. The human signal cut through the aftermath of the first authorization cycle, clean and unencrypted, routed to every council command node simultaneously. No fanfare. No coded hierarchy. Tags. A single channel opened, steady as a metronome. Ceasefire lanes are required, the human voice said, calm, unaccented. We are transmitting coordinates now. Civilian evacuation corridors will remain open for 6 hours. The tactical map. Updated without permission. Pale arcs bloomed through the battle space, threading between council formations, marked with human timestamps and velocity tolerances. They were precise to the decimal. They assumed movement. Grand Registrar Thale did not answer at once. He allowed the silence to stretch, a practiced reminder of scale. 10,000 council vessels held their lattice at 0.8 AU. Energy banks remained charged. Nothing had yet been fired. Authority? Thale finally replied, his tone indulgent. You are not recognized as a negotiating power. The human voice did not rise. Authority is not required to move civilians. A second packet followed, dense with data. Population centers, habitat spin rates, estimated transit loads, 20 million lives mapped into orderly flows. The humans had done the math already. A murmur crossed the bridge. They presume compliance, an admiral observed. They presume mercy, another corrected. Thale allowed himself a thin smile. Precedent answers this. He gestured, and the archivist display unfolded. 1,000 engagements, 1,000 refusals recorded and resolved. The Council did not negotiate under threat. It enforced stability. It processed disorder. Your request is denied, Thale said, by unanimous precedent. The human reply came within 0.4 seconds. Then mark this, the voice said. Any vessel transiting these lanes will not be targeted. Any civilian craft will be protected. This offer stands until the window closes. A pause. Deliberate. We will defend ourselves if fired upon. Several officers laughed, not loudly, not cruelly. With familiarity, you hear that? A tactician said. Defend! The word hung there, small against the massed tonnage of the fleet, against the clean certainty of energy doctrine, against 10,000 firing solutions already aligned. Thale leaned forward. Your corridors intersect Council maneuver space, he said. You are interfering with lawful action. Law does not require slaughter, the human replied. That drew sharper laughter. Record moral objection, Thale ordered. Proceed to Phase 1. The clocks resumed. 6 hours ticked down in neat red numerals. Energy coils sang as they reached full charge. The human lanes remained highlighted, stubborn lines of blue in a map that did not acknowledge them. One junior officer hesitated. Registrar, she said quietly, they are holding position, not advancing, not retreating. Fear. Thale said again, and believed it. They will scatter once suppression begins. The human channel remained open, silent now, waiting. Final targeting confirmations rolled in. 10,000 acknowledgements, 0 dissent. Precedent had spoken. The Council answered terms with authority, and authority had never failed before. The first salvo was supposed to end the discussion. Grand Registrar Thale watched the authorization cascade complete. 10,000. Green confirmations blooming across the command lattice. Energy doctrine engaged at full coherence. Lances, arcs, and particle storms leapt the 0.8 AU gap in disciplined waves, light bending under their own precision. This was the moment resistance always broke. The tactical display registered impact across all 67 human hulls. The screen filled with contact symbols, each tagged for penetration depth, thermal bloom, and hull failure probability. Thale waited for the red. It did not come. Report, he said, already frowning. Numbers began to populate, hesitant, then insistent. Energy transfer values scrolled upward, then flattened. Heat spikes diffused sideways instead of inward. Particle coherence degraded on contact, bleeding off into broad-spectrum glare. Absorption, a gunnery officer asked, disbelief creeping in. Not absorption, the analyst replied. Redirection. The figures locked in. 97%. Energy dissipation across primary hull layers. Residual heat vented along external channels, radiated harmlessly into space. Internal temperatures rose by fractions of a degree. No structural compromise. No systems loss. Silence took the bridge. Impossible. Thale leaned forward as secondary salvos struck. He watched, breath held, as the same pattern repeated. Human ships glowed briefly, white and gold, then dimmed again, unbroken. The map refused to change. Damage? He demanded. Cosmetic scoring only, came the answer. Hull ablation less than 0.3%. No breaches, no casualties. A standalone line flashed unbidden across the auxiliary display, pulled from the raw feed. 0 penetrations. Recorded. A nervous laugh broke out and died immediately. They should be venting plasma, an admiral said. They should be slag. Instead, the human formation held unchanged. No evasive scatter, no return fire. Just 67 ships absorbing punishment that had erased fleets 100 times their size. Thale felt something cold settle behind his eyes. Adjust frequencies, he snapped. Cycle harmonics, overload them. The third wave struck harder, coherence pushed past safe margins. Council emitters screamed under the strain. Again, the humans burned and endured. Energy bled away along visible lattices embedded beneath, their armor like veins conducting light. Efficiency stabilizing at 95 to 98%, the analyst said, voice tight. They're tuned for this. Tuned. Another line appeared on the display, stark and unwelcome. Fire ineffective. The human channel opened again. We have logged your weapons profiles, the calm voice said. Further energy fire will not alter outcomes. Thaler's mouth went dry. He realized, distantly, that the humans had waited to speak until the data was undeniable. This is not possible, someone whispered. The humans still did not fire. Back. They did not gloat. They did not threaten. They simply endured, holding their blue evacuation lanes steady, while 10,000 council ships expended doctrine against armor that treated it like weather. Thale straightened slowly. Around him, officers avoided each other's eyes. The record had no precedent for this, and for the first time since the engagement began, the numbers were no longer obedient. They moved only after the math was finished. The human formation changed. Posture without warning, 67 hulls pivoting as one. No broadcast preceded it, no declaration. The blue evacuation lanes remained fixed, calm lines in a map that suddenly could not keep up. Acceleration spike, the analyst said. Reading, confirming, 12. 14, sustained. Thale's breath caught. 14G was not a maneuver, it was a sentence. The humans did not fan out, they did not charge blindly. They broke vectors, each ship choosing a different solution, a different slice through council space. Distances. The doctrine assumed stable collapsed into numbers too small to respect. Time to intercept? Thale asked. The answer came thin. Under 3 minutes, some under 90 seconds, impossible again. Council formations were built for standoff dominance, overlapping fields calibrated for opponents who feared proximity. The humans did not. They treated distance like a liability to be eliminated. Council ships began to adjust, belatedly. 10,000 hulls attempted to realign, to rotate firing arcs inward, to maintain the lattice. The lattice failed. Human vectors threaded through, it exploiting gaps measured in kilometers, not fleets. Extreme acceleration let them knife between firing solutions before they could resolve. Energy weapons slewed too slowly. Target locks broke and reformed and broke again. The map became chaos. They're inside our envelopes, a tactician said. Voice rising. We're losing crossfire integrity. A punchline burned itself into the display. Range advantage lost. Thale watched as one human ship passed within 20 kilometers of a council cruiser, its hull a blur of scorched armor and controlled flame. The cruiser's emitters tried to track, failed, and overshot. The human ship did not fire. It did not need to. They're herding us, an admiral said. Forcing collisions. Council vessels clipped each other as formations compressed under stress. Shields flared, 2 ships sheared antennae and spun off, not destroyed but broken out of alignment. The human vectors adjusted instantly, capitalizing on every mistake. G-load survivability? Thale demanded, grasping for doctrine. Human crews remain functional, the analyst replied. Biometric estimates suggest tolerance beyond council norms. Training adaptation suspected. Training. The word landed harder than any weapon. Another. Human transmission cut in, not triumphant, not raised, informational. Evacuation lanes remain open, the voice said. You are entering unsafe proximity. The humans were warning them. Thale's jaw tightened. They cannot maintain this, he said, more to himself than to the bridge. No species sustains 14G without losses. But the losses did not come. Human ships bled velocity into brutal turns, vectoring again, closing again. They used momentum like a tool, not a risk. Council fire scattered, ineffective at knife range, while the lattice dissolved into isolated clusters. A second standalone line flashed, cold and final. Distance is no longer protection. Thale felt the engagement slip from abstraction into something intimate and dangerous. The humans were close enough now that individual hull markings resolved. On the display, close enough that mistakes would be fatal. They still had not fired, but they had finished closing, and the numbers said they were exactly where they wanted to be. They fired when the clock reached 0. No flourish announced it. no roar. The human. Ships simply transitioned from motion to execution, and the battle space obeyed new rules. Railgun capacitors dumped in perfect sequence, each discharge tagged, timed, and spaced with mechanical patience. The first slug crossed the gap in 1.3 seconds. Council. Command ship primacy of Vel did not register impact. Its forward spine vanished between frames, matter unstitched by kinetic energy that did not bloom or burn. The slug exited what remained and continued on, velocity barely altered. Command loss, the analyst said, stunned. Primary node, gone. The human formation did not pause. Missile bays opened across 67 hulls, releasing waves counted in exact numbers. 144 per ship, 9,648 total. They did not scatter. They did not seek targets. Independently, they flew assigned paths, each missile a line in a larger equation. Thale stared as the tactical map updated, red icons blinking out in disciplined rhythm. Command vessels first, coordination hubs, fire control nexuses, ships that made other ships dangerous. Interval? An admiral asked. 5 seconds, the analyst replied. They're firing in cycles. A standalone line burned itself onto the display. Counted. Controlled. Final. Railgun spoke again. Another cycle. Another command ship ceased to exist. Its shields irrelevant against mass moving at a fraction of light speed. The Council's energy doctrine had no answer to momentum that did not care about fields. Missiles followed, not saturating, not overwhelming. Selecting. They're bypassing. Escorts, a tactician said, horror creeping in. They're ignoring half the fleet. They were ignoring what did not matter. Thale watched as the Council's remaining formations tried to respond, but coordination lagged by seconds now. Orders conflicted. Fire overlapped uselessly. Without command nodes, 10,000 ships became thousands of individuals, each dangerous, none decisive. The humans exploited that instantly. A third cycle fired. 12 seconds. Another command vessel erased, then another, Each loss echoed through the fleet as targeting solutions degraded and sensor fusion fractured. Total command ships lost, Thale asked, voice tight. 12, came the answer. All primary and secondary, a second punchline appeared, stark and merciless. Leadership removed. Missiles began detonating inside hulls now, delayed fuses triggering past armor, past shields never designed to stop solid mass. Internal explosions blossomed without sound, ripping through compartments with surgical intent. Casualty estimates climbed, not catastrophically, but decisively. They're not glassing us, an admiral whispered. They're amputating. Human fire never strayed into the blue evacuation lanes. Civilian traffic moved untouched. 20 million lives flowing through corridors the humans had drawn and defended with their own hulls. The contrast was obscene. Another human transmission cut through, calm as before. Command resistance neutralized, the voice said. Surrender protocols are active. Power down weapons and hold position. They spoke as if this were administrative. Thale felt the bridge tilt, not physically but morally. The humans had waited until dominance was absolute before offering mercy. They had demonstrated the full extent of their violence and chosen restraint. Anyway, railguns fell silent. Missiles ceased mid-wave, self-terminating as their targets vanished or powered down. The sudden quiet was louder than the battle had been. Council ships drifted, wounded, leaderless, alive. Thale swallowed. The record scrolled on, updating itself with facts it had never been built to hold. Kinetic kill efficiency. Command decapitation. Timelines. A new category forming under tactics, arithmetic of impact, the system labeled it. The humans held their positions, weapons hot but unused, blue lanes still glowing through the wreckage. They had proven their point without exhausting it. And as the final damage assessment stabilized, one truth settled over the shattered lattice. This war was never about winning. It was about demonstrating that resistance had already been solved. The Silence was deliberate. Across the broken lattice, human weapons remained aligned, capacitors charged, missile doors closed but unlocked. 67 ships held position among drifting council hulls. Close enough now that hull scars and vented atmosphere resolved as detail, not abstraction. Then the human broadcast expanded, not louder, wider. It overrode nothing. It asked for no permission. It simply appeared on every channel the council still had, layered with authentication hashes and archival formats older than several member species. This engagement is paused, the human voice said. Escalation authority is suspended. Thale felt the words land like a physical force. Paused was not a term in council doctrine. Battles ended by victory or extinction. Nothing in between. You have encountered armed resistance while conducting forced processing, the voice continued. That practice violates human law. The display shifted. Not tactical now. Legal. Statutes scrolled in clean blocks, translated automatically. Prohibitions against slavery, against collective punishment, against annihilation as governance. Surrender protections are active, the human said. Any vessel powering down weapons and holding position will not be fired upon. Boarding actions will be conducted under medical oversight. A standalone line appeared, centered, impossible to ignore. We do not kill prisoners. Murmurs broke out across the council bridge, uncontrolled now. Some officers stared at the statutes. Others stared at casualty estimates that had frozen mid-update. 12 command ships lost, thousands damaged, millions of civilians still alive because the blue lanes had held. You have 6 hours, the human voice said. Evacuation corridors remain open. 20 million civilians are transiting safely. Interference will be treated as hostile action. Thale's mouth opened, then closed. Authority demanded response. Precedent demanded defiance. But the lattice was gone, and authority without force was only noise. They're dictating law, an admiral whispered. No, another said. They're enforcing it. The broadcast continued, unhurried. Individuals responsible for forced labor, population seizure, or extermination orders will be detained and tried, the human said. Trials will be public. Evidence standards are attached. Attached. As if this were correspondence. They're not erasing us, Thale realized aloud. They're cataloguing. A second punchline cut through the scrolling text. Justice follows dominance. Some council vessels powered down immediately. Others hesitated, then followed. One by one, weapon signatures dimmed, shields dropped. The map shifted colors, red to amber to blue, not by explosion, but by decision. Human ships adjusted subtly, covering surrendering hulls, interposing themselves between wounded council craft and any that still bristled. Medical shuttles launched, marked with unmistakable symbols, crossing former kill zones. Without escort, Thale watched a human cruiser rotate to shield a damaged council frigate from debris. The image burned itself into his memory, an inversion of everything the record had taught him. This is not mercy, an admiral said weakly. It's theater. Thale shook his head. No, it's procedure. The human voice returned one, last time, quieter now. Compliance will be met with restraint, it said. Resistance will be met with force already demonstrated. No threat, just reference. As the 6-hour clock continued to tick down, the battle did not resume. It transformed, from annihilation to custody, from victory to jurisdiction. And for the first time since the Council had expanded beyond its cradle systems, the galaxy saw war halted not by exhaustion, but by law applied after it was undeniably earned. They had been watching long before. The first shot. The Coalition gallery did not sit on the Council bridge. It orbited farther out, neutral platforms anchored at sanctioned distances, packed with analysts, historians, and attachés who had learned to read wars by the way data moved. Their feeds had not gone dark when the lattice collapsed. They had multiplied. This doesn't fit, one observer said, voice low. No species builds like this for first contact. Screens filled with comparative overlays. Human hull schematics rotated beside archival wrecks pulled from extinct systems at the edge of known space. The match was not aesthetic. It was functional, Armor thickness aligned. Heat dissipation channels mirrored ancient scars. They didn't design for us, another observer said. They designed for something else. The coalition chair brought up doctrine files, seized legally from open human archives after translation barriers fell. The dates drew a hush. 2 centuries, 3. More. Layered revisions, each responding to threats no longer present. Exterminator class assumptions, the chair read. Total loss tolerance. No negotiation expected. A standalone line appeared on the shared feed, extracted from a human training directive. Plan for extinction, except no surprises. The observers watched recordings from human academies. Crews strapped into acceleration rigs, enduring 14G until vision narrowed and breath came in, controlled. Counts. Failures were logged. Survivors trained again, not for heroics, for repeatability. Look at the crews, an attaché said. They're not elite by exception, they're standardized. Standardized endurance, standardized violence. A historian pulled up battle simulations stamped centuries old. Railgun decapitation strikes, missile waves that ignored mass to remove coordination. Blue corridors embedded even then, lines drawn through predicted slaughter. They always planned to stop, she said. After dominance. The implication rippled through the room. Humanity's mercy was not born of improvisation. It was scheduled. Another feed overlaid human ship numbers against the Council's. 67 against 10,000. The disparity was intentional. Force packages calibrated not to overwhelm, but to demonstrate control under constraint. They were testing themselves. Someone whispered. No, the chair corrected. They were confirming. A second punchline surfaced from a human strategic memo, dated long before first contact. If we must fight, we must win cleanly. The coalition observers understood then why the humans had waited through energy fire. Why they had closed distance before shooting. Why command ships had died first and civilians not at all. Every move had precedent in human history. Wars fought on their own planet, against their own kind, refined until chaos became procedure. They assumed the galaxy would fail the same way, the historian said softly. Centralized authority. Predictable escalation. Moral delay. Outside the gallery windows, the aftermath drifted. Council ships powered down. Human vessels held steady, unchanged in posture now that the threat had diminished. Nothing in their behavior suggested surprise. The chair closed the final file, hands steady. This wasn't a response, she said. It was a reveal. Around her, coalition members began composing reports that would redraw threat assessments across 1,000 systems. Not about weapons, about intent. Humanity had not arrived unprepared. They had arrived early, carrying doctrines meant for monsters the galaxy had forgotten, and waiting to see if the Council would prove itself one of them. The schedule resumed. 0:00, not the battle schedule, the enforcement one. Across the shattered battle space, human ships shifted by fractions of a degree, reassigning arcs, tightening nets that were no longer aimed at destruction but control. Timers propagated through the fleet, synchronized to the same atomic reference. Every action that followed would land on a count. Phase 8 begins, the human command voice said, transmitted openly. Containment and custody. Council vessels that had powered down weapons found themselves bracketed by human hulls at fixed distances. 5 kilometers, then 3, then 1. Close enough to intervene. Far enough to signal restraint. Shields remained down on the human side, a calculated risk broadcast as confidence. Boarding craft launched in waves of 12, not rushing, not hesitating. Their trajectories were clean lines plotted through debris fields and vented atmosphere. Each carried med teams, security units, and legal officers. All 3, every time. A Council destroyer attempted to break formation, engines flaring in panic. So, response came 6 seconds later. A single railgun round punched through its drive cone, not detonating the reactor, not shattering the hull. The ship spun, dead in space, intact. Boarding craft diverted automatically. A standalone line pulsed across Coalition and Council feeds alike. Escape denied. Survival preserved. Thale watched from the dimmed Council bridge as surrender indicators multiplied. Amber icons bloomed across the map in clusters, then cascades. In one ship powered down, then the next, then 10 more as captains realized resistance no longer altered outcomes. "They're everywhere," an admiral whispered. "We can't even see the edges." Human strikes continued, but not as salvos. As corrections. Missile pods opened only when needed, releasing pairs or trios to neutralize specific systems. Comm spines, sensor masts, weapons couplings. Each detonation was internal, quiet, precise. No secondary explosions, no fires spreading beyond containment bulkheads. Numbers tracked everything. Boarding actions underway. 312. Weapons safed. 8,940. Medical transfers initiated. 41,000 and rising council. Gunners who delayed too long found themselves disarmed without being killed. Rail slugs sheared turrets cleanly away. Missiles burrowed and slept, inert unless reactivation was detected. The humans did not punish hesitation with death. They punished it with inevitability. A second punchline appeared, stark against the data flood. "You may stop at any time." Some did. Some didn't. 3 Council heavy cruisers attempted a coordinated counterfire, their captains choosing defiance over custody. Energy lances flared and vanished against human hulls as before. The response was immediate and disproportionate. Only in speed, 4 railgun cycles, 20 seconds. All 3 cruisers lost propulsion, command decks, and weapon control. Hulls remained pressurized, life signs stabilized within minutes. "No further warnings," the human voice said, not angry, not raised. "Continue surrender." The remaining resistance collapsed. Across the battle space, white flags, digital encoded, flickered into existence as council ships transmitted compliance codes. 10,000 vessels became 9,000 compliant hulls, then 8, then fewer, as counts resolved and duplicates cleared. Human ships adjusted again, forming layered security rings around clusters of surrendered craft. No victory formation. No celebratory spread, just coverage. Boarding teams reported in, one by one. Bridge secured. Command staff detained. Evidence preserved. Medical stable. Each phrase landed like a gavel. Thale felt something inside him give way as he watched a human boarding officer escort a council captain, alive, restrained, uninjured, through a breach lit with portable lamps. There was no spectacle, no hatred. Just process. "They're dismantling us," he said quietly. "No," the admiral replied, hollow. "They're disassembling." Outside, the blue evacuation lanes closed one by one as civilian traffic cleared. 20 million lives accounted for. 0 losses attributed to human fire. The final corridor dimmed and vanished, its work complete. The human fleet did not advance after that. It held. Timers expired across the battle space, phase markers flipping, from active to complete. The schedule ticked forward without deviation, each objective met within tolerance. Containment achieved, hostilities reduced to 0.7%. Dominance established. The last council vessel to surrender powered, down its weapons at 05:58:12, 108 seconds ahead of the 6-hour mark. Human systems logged the margin, archived it, and moved on. The human command voice spoke once more, not to threaten, not to boast. "Active combat operations concluded," it said. "Custodial operations ongoing." And in the quiet that followed, filled with drifting wreckage, powered-down fleets, and thousands of lives spared by precision, the galaxy understood what dominance by schedule truly meant. Not chaos mastered. Time itself obeyed. The holding bays filled before the morgues ever would have. Human medical craft moved through the surrendered fleets with steady priority, docking first with the worst damaged hulls, not the most valuable. Council wounded were stabilized under white lights and clipped voices, injuries catalogued without comment on species or rank. Pain management came standard. Translation overlays followed automatically. Thale sat in a containment chair that adjusted itself to his frame, restraints firm but not cruel. A human medic knelt to scan a burn along his arm, sealed it, and moved on without meeting his eyes. "Registrar," an officer said nearby, reading from a slate. "You are detained pending tribunal review. You will not be harmed. Not if cooperative, not unless you resist. You will not be harmed." Across the battle space, similar scenes unfolded. Thousands of council personnel processed into custody, weapons logged, insignia recorded, statements offered and declined. No one was struck. No one disappeared. Trials were scheduled before sentences were imagined. The council's authority fractured quietly. It began with silence. Member fleets that did not answer. Recall signals, because recall signals no longer carried weight. Then came messages routed around the council node entirely, addressed instead to human command relays. Requests for clarification, for observer status, for alignment talks. One by one, systems chose paperwork over obedience. "They are defecting," an aide said to Thale, disbelief plain, without a vote. Thale closed his eyes. "They're choosing survivability." Human broadcasts followed, not triumphant declarations but frameworks. Legal packets transmitted in digestible layers. Anti-slavery statutes, surrender law, limits on force, standards of evidence. No demand to join. No threat for refusal, just structure. A standalone line circulated through diplomatic channels within hours. Order without erasure. Council chambers across 100 systems went dark as emergency sessions collapsed into argument. Some members called for resistance, but the calls rang hollow now that the arithmetic was public. 10,000 ships had not been annihilated. They had been rendered irrelevant. Human envoys did not appear in person. They did not need to. Their law spoke well enough on its own. In the detention ward, Thale watched a feed from a neighboring system where a planetary assembly voted, narrowly, to adopt provisional human legal protections for sentient labor. The motion passed on the promise of inspection rights and evacuation guarantees. "They're copying us," an officer murmured. "No," Thale said softly. "They're escaping us." The shift accelerated, trade corridors rerouted, defense pacts quietly suspended. Systems that had lived under council precedent for centuries discovered that precedent only mattered when enforced. And enforcement had limits now. Human command issued one final clarification. "Custody does not imply conquest," the message read. "Alignment is voluntary. Jurisdiction applies only to acts committed." The implication was devastating. The council had ruled by inevitability. Humanity ruled by consent, backed by force already proven. In his chair, Thale felt the weight of the record pressed down on him, pages rewriting themselves in real time. The council would not be erased. It would be reduced to a case study, a warning, a failed doctrine archived for others to learn from. As detainees were moved to long-term, holding and trials scheduled across neutral venues, the galaxy's map began to change color. Not red, not blue. Gray. Then something new. The humans had won more than a battle. They had offered an exit from fear, and enough systems took it that gravity itself began to shift. For the first time in generations, power flowed not toward the largest fleet, but toward the law that had stopped firing when it could have kept going. The alert came after the trials were scheduled. Human fleets held station long enough to transfer custody, evidence, and medical responsibility to neutral platforms. Council space grew quiet in a way it had not been for centuries, not peaceful, but emptied of certainty. The humans did not linger. They never had. As the last enforcement timers closed and ships turned outward, long-range arrays shifted from battle posture to survey. Old habit, older fear. It was a junior analyst who saw it first. "Contact anomaly," she said, steady but tight. "Outer rim sensor net, bearing 917 by 12. The display resolved slowly, reluctant to commit. A pattern in the noise, a rhythm beneath radiation and drift. Human systems reacted before anyone spoke. Cross-checks initiated automatically. Archives cracked open that no alien database could access. Records sealed not by classification, but by age. Thale, watching from detention, recognized the change in posture immediately. He had seen it once before, when humans had finished fighting, and started worrying. What is it? An aide asked. The analyst swallowed. Signature match, high confidence. The screen populated with comparisons. Gravitational wake ratios. Emission fall-off curves. Void shadow artifacts that made sensors misreport distance and mass. Every line converged on the same result. Exterminator class. A standalone line appeared, pulled from a human war log centuries old. This signal precedes disappearance. The contact was not close. It did not need to be. It moved with patience, measured in decades, not hours. Entire systems could die between blinks if it chose to accelerate. Human command convened without ceremony. No panic, no raised voices. Match confidence? The fleet. Lead asked. 99.4, the analyst replied. Within historical variance. Thale felt cold spread through his chest. You've seen this before, he said. The human officer looked at him. Not with anger, not with judgment. With something like grim familiarity. Yes, she said, we survived it. The record expanded, stars gone dark, trade routes ending mid-transmission, civilizations collapsing without battle debris, without surrender signals, just absence. This was the threat model, the human continued. The reason for the doctrines you've just experienced. The Council had been a test without knowing it. The human fleet did not turn back towards Sol. It turned outward, aligning along vectors that had been charted long before first contact. Beacons activated across deep space, calling to assets that had never been revealed. A second punchline surfaced on shared feeds, brief and merciless, not alone, not unready. Coalition observers began transmitting warnings of their own, voices stripped of arrogance now. Systems that had just defected accelerated preparations without being asked. Evacuation models spun up. Defense councils formed overnight. Human. Command issued a final public message, galaxy-wide, unembellished. We have confirmed an exterminator approach from the outer rim, it said. Timelines will be shared. Coordination is advised. No promise of salvation, no claim of authority, just fact. As the fleets dispersed and the map stretched outward to include a threat older than any current power, Thale understood the final cruelty of the Council's mistake. They had mistaken humanity for a rival. Humanity had been a warning system. Far beyond the debris and the courtrooms, beyond the realigned treaties and new laws, the signal pulsed again. Steady, precise, unchanged, by politics or mercy. This time it